sustainable development. Heard of it? One person's heard of it. Okay. What you're going to see tonight is dealing with sustainable development and how it affects property rights. Now, this is essentially a religion that's been adopted by many levels of the government, as you will see during this presentation. And I want to pick up now at the national level. I'm going to work very quickly on down to the local level. And this is a picture from the 2000 conference, United Nations conference, where 147 heads of state came together. And they said that there are 8 specific goals that we want to incorporate across the world by the year 2015. So 2 of those are in particular of interest to us. The first is Goal 1, to eradicate poverty and hunger. And the other one, Goal 7, is to ensure that environmental sustainability is incorporated on a global basis. So, in accordance with that, Obama has introduced the Global Poverty Act of 2007. It has already passed Congress, has come out of the Senate conference, and is headed for the Senate floor for a full vote. Now, this is a bipartisan effort to incorporate this, and it will essentially take money out of your pocket and spread it across the globe in copious amounts, far more than what you've been accustomed to. Now, the interesting part about this is that it incorporates that Goal 7 because the strategy requires to integrate the principles of sustainable development into policies and programs across the world, and of course that includes the federal government. Now, the judiciary has already recognized the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and the executive branch has a long-standing record of incorporating sustainable development within our government. The USDA has a Directive 9500-6, and in that directive, paragraph 4C says that the philosophy, principles, and concepts of sustainable development shall be incorporated into the USDA agency. And on a yearly basis, they will review every regulations to ensure that it is in compliance with sustainable development. So now at the local level, how is, we always talk about the international level, and there's really very little we can do about this, but now let's bring this down to where we live every day. And the local level also has this umbrella of sustainable development, and there's 3 items or 3 implementation processes that I'm going to talk about tonight. That does not mean that there aren't more, and there certainly are, from church to fishing to sowing. If you type in sustainable development and then whatever you want to type in, fishing or sowing or any other activity that you can think of, you'll wind up with hits associated with sustainable development. But I'm going to talk about comprehensive planning, limited home rule, and flood damage ordinance. All 3 of these are in effect right now across Alabama and the rest of the country. And here is the front cover of the Elmore County Comprehensive Plan. This was a plan that we were invited down to Elmore County. It's a rural county just north of Montgomery. And we were asked to come down and make some presentations dealing with sustainable development and their comprehensive plan. And it says, I want to just kind of go through a few quotes from their plan. It says, what is planning? Planning is a term used for a branch of public policy which encompasses various disciplines which seek to order, regulate the use of land in an efficient way. That's not according to the private owner, that's according to the government dictates, and explore several aspects of the built and social environment of the county, municipalities, and communities. Now, I needed to look up some of the definitions because I didn't have a good definition for some of it, and the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences says that the built environment encompasses all of buildings, spaces, and products created or modified by the people. So that's a pretty broad definition. Next, the social environment. It is a complex network of human interaction which incorporates or operates for reasons of tradition, culture, business, pleasure, information exchange, institutional organization, legal procedure, and governance. I want you to pay very close attention to that because we're going to be looking at governance. It is a change in the governmental system that has been adopted by 15 counties already in Alabama. Then human betterment, social progress, and the last one I always like to emphasizes spiritual enlightenment. Now this is the comprehensive plan for Elmore County. It is essentially identical across the board from county to county or city to city. Next, and here's now a picture from the comprehensive plan of Elmore County. Participants in the comprehensive planning process have issued a region or a authoritative call for Elmore County's future to be sustainable and balanced. And then it goes on, the very next page, it says, the term sustainable development was popularized during the 1992 Earth Summit. While the term sustainability is most often found at the forefront of discussions concerning natural resources, the theme of sustainability underlies all visions of Elmore County's future. So we're not talking about the environment. We're talking about every aspect of your future is involved in this process. Now, if you type in 3 circles and sustainable development, you'll see the most commonly observed and used logo for sustainable development. And here is a picture directly copied from the Elmore County Comprehensive Plan. And next is the mayor of Eufaula, who in 2002 is drawing the very same circles on his whiteboard in his visioning sessions so that Eufaula could now be certified by the Audubon Society as Alabama's first sustainable community. So I'm trying to lay the groundwork here that this is across the board. Next was the last meeting. We held 4 meetings in Elmore County, and this is the last one held at the Wetumpka Civic Center. Now, each one of these meetings had doubling in attendance. This one wound up with about 600, 700 people. It was a standing room only, and we were explaining the subdivision regulations to these people and how it would affect their property rights under sustainable development. And they now have voted out 4 out of 5 of their county commissioners, and one community that was instituting smart growth, which is part and parcel of sustainable development, voted out the entire council and mayor in Elmore, the city of Elmore. Now, if you get into a discussion with a trained facilitator and you don't understand the definitions that he's working under, you will lose the discussion or the argument, because they are operating with a new set of definitions and you need to be aware of it. Now, this document is under construction, Tools and Techniques for Local Planning. It is produced and published by the state of Minnesota. So this is an official document, and on page 73 it has the definition for freedom of choice. And here it is. People should be able to choose where they live and do business as long as they pay the identifiable cost of those choices and do not impose unaccounted for cost on other people or nature now or in the future. Now, typically the average person has no idea what freedom of choice under this would mean, but you'll have an idea of what freedom of choice is, but it certainly doesn't coincide with this. And I usually use the example of someone cranking his automobile. When he does that in the morning, he's contributed to global warming. He's degraded the environment from the exhaust fumes for the flowers, insects, and animals for that generation. Now, because of the precautionary principle, which means that we have to ensure that you take precautions not to damage the environment, then future generations are also involved in this. So you're not paying the cost for possible damage to future generations of insects, flowers, and animals because you cranked your automobile. And that's essentially a good example of what this is referring to. So let me go on now to the governance, because most people, if you watch your articles in the paper, they'll frequently use governance instead of government. And here the comprehensive plan for Elmore County calls for governance, uses the word 9 times, and on page 3 it says self-governance is anticipated to provide the tools necessary to address developmental economic concerns. Well, the definition for governance, it is not government. It is the framework of rules, institutions, and practices that set limits on the behavior of individuals, organizations, and companies. So we're talking about a top-down organization that will control your behavior at the local level, including all the organizations. If you go to the, let me see if I can pull up my arrow, there it is. If you go to the ACCA, which is the Association of County Commissioners of Alabama, and you scroll down to this section right here, it says self-governance, and you click on that, it will take you to the next page, which is actually, this is just a screenshot. And this is a page where it shows that 15 counties, and I'll put those up on the screen right here. These are the 15 counties that have adopted this new system of government by a vote of the people. And it goes on and is quoted, Bob Riley as saying this is a great and wonderful thing for communities to have self-governance, and they actually don't have a concept of what they've done. But the ballot language, now this has been used across the board, it says that shall the provisions of Act 2005-200, which authorizes the county to abate certain health and safety nuisances, be applicable in the unincorporated areas of the county. Now this is from Tuscaloosa County, Jackson County uses the same thing. Madison County has this also. You're under this very same process, or new governmental system, I should say. Well, what is life like? What can happen under a limited self-governance act? For instance, a code enforcement officer may enter your property without a warrant, declare your personal property junk, require that your belongings be disposed of within 10 days, and failure to comply with his directive will incur a $150 day fine and court costs and fees. Now, that's the hard facts, or some of the hard facts, about this system that's been incorporated in these 15 counties. Now, I'm going to try to bring this down to a personal level, because Marshall County, as far as we can determine, was the first county to hire a code enforcement officer and put them out on the streets. And here is one of the first victims in Marshall County by the name of Moss Dalrymple. And Ken, I'm going to usually kind of break up this thing, and I'll get Ken to tell you what happened to Moss.
Moss has in his hand there. I was kind of interested about what that was. You can see there's an aircraft carrier in the background, and couldn't really see it because of the reflection on it. Blew it up and realized it said CB6 and it was a presidential commendation. Then went on the internet and started looking it up. And Moss was a veteran of 3 wars. He was a veteran of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. In World War II, which is what this is about, this is a presidential citation given to the Enterprise that he was on during World War II. It's the first time that the presidential citation was ever given. The Enterprise won 20 battle stars. She was the most decorated ship of war in the history of the U.S. Navy. At one time, for about 5.5 months there, they were the only U.S. aircraft carrier left afloat in the Pacific against the Japanese fleet, which was 6 carriers and all the accompanying ships and destroyers. And in the time that they were there, I think they shot down 911 enemy aircraft, sunk 97 ships, put another 67 or so out of commission. When they came back through England, the British Lord of the Admiralty met them in England and gave them the Royal British Admiralty pennant. That pennant has only been given to one ship other than a ship of the Royal Navy in over 400 years. So what the Enterprise did was phenomenal. She was hit 6 times by bombs herself and lost over 300 members of her crew to killed or wounded in action. Well, then after World War II, Moss went into Korea. We don't know exactly when he was captured, but he used to love to put the local kids in the neighborhood on his knee and tell them about the 4 times that he escaped from the prisoner of war camp. So we don't know the full details of that, but we know he was in Korea and he was captured, and he did escape. And then he was in Vietnam also. He retired from the military. He moved into Marshall County outside of Boaz. He was going to live where he wanted to, like he wanted to. But he had a lot of property that, he accumulated over the years, so he had quite a bit of money. And you'd have to say Moss was a little bit eccentric. He loved to go to an auction and buy things and give them away to the local kids. Or he would find a car that he liked, he'd buy it, he'd take it home, drive it 2 or 3 days, and he'd park it. 2 weeks later, he'd go to the auction, he'd find another car, and he'd buy that one, drive it home, drive it a few days, and then he'd park it. So over a period of time, he accumulated a lot of fairly exotic cars, antique motorcycles, and all that stuff. So he was living out in the country, minding his own business, but to an outside observer, he looked like a poor individual. And so the county junk officer, they decided that all that stuff was worth a lot of money for salvage, I suppose, so they issued him a citation telling him that he had 10 days to move these 90 vehicles and everything he had, or they were going to come haul it all to the county dump. And it stressed him out so bad that the next day he died of a heart attack.
The next line.
Yeah. This is the way Moss's place looked the morning that he died. And it's not beautiful, but it's not near like what it was when the county got done with it. But his neighbors all said that he got stressed out so bad he could barely talk, and the neighbors came up the next day to help him start moving stuff, and they found him laying dead in his trailer. This is 14 months after the county cleaned it up. The county came out there and they hauled off all the vehicles, anything that was worth anything, and then this is the mess they left. It looks like a tornado went through there. And the week after his daughter in South Carolina sold all these cars, the junk officer came by the week after that and demanded to know where each and every one of those vehicles went. Now, if you're the junk officer, what do you care where they went as long as they went? Unless, of course, you were planning on getting a kickback from the salvage yard. So in Marshall County, they have gone after the old and the poor and the people that they didn't think could defend themselves, so that they could set the precedent then for what they're going to do for the rest of them. We think a lot of what this has got to do with is this grant money that's coming into the Huntsville area, you know, from the military. These guys think that they're going to sell all their houses for $1 million a piece, and they're going to make all this money if they can just clean up all these rednecks out in the country and makes them look good driving to and from their property. And also, by the way, if they can make money in the process, that's good too. So this is what Moss's place looks like after the county cleaned it up. Now, they were unhappy with it before he died, but nobody's made a move since to do anything about this mess that they created. So they don't consider this to be junk anymore. But he had things like, he had a 1945 Harley Davidson that was practically restored that was worth over $40,000. He had a 1933 Indian that he was restoring. There's no telling what that thing was worth. And they tell us they burned down the shed it was even just destroyed. My guess is somebody made off with this thing. We're talking about some real money there. But anyway, this term governance that Don's talking about, governance is a system of government by bureaucrats. They're unelected. They're a shadow government next to your elected government. And you have these people telling you what you can and can't do with your property by unelected individuals you have no way to control or to get out of office. So anyway, that takes care of Moss. And he's on this DVD we're going to give you out. Has full interviews with his neighbors about what happened along with other people.
Yeah, and I'm about to show you the second victim of the Self-Governance Act in Marshall County. Now, it's unfortunate that Moss died, because had his story got out, I believe there would have been veteran groups, or at least veterans. I know I would have. I'd have driven up to Dalrymple just to stand behind this man. I mean, if there's anybody that ever earned the right to have property, whatever property it was, I don't care what kind of junk it is, on his. And the sad state of affairs is that if we don't get off our rears and do something about personal property rights, the man that's dodging bullets overseas is going to come back, and he's going to want to know what happened to his property rights. I don't want to have to look him in the eye. The next slide is going to be a little bit of a clip from Jean Tresch. She has a heart-rendering story to tell. This is only just a few minutes, I think about 2 minutes of Jean.
They did this to my grandfather when I was like 4 years old. They took his land in Huntsville. They just come in, they say, you're poor, you have no money for a lawyer, slam, we're taking your land. And we had to go. I remember the wrecking ball coming and destroying my grandfather's house. And he was crying and said, you'll destroy me before you take my house. But they took his house. I'm sorry. And I feel they're doing the same thing to me. And they're just saying, well, she ain't got no money. This is an easy take. They're just like they're the Nazis. You know, my eyes ain't blue enough. I'm sorry. That's another thing. Riley just got an award for supposedly helping the homeless get out from under the bridge. Well, then why are you trying to take my humble home and put me there? Because that's the only place I got left is under the bridge if they take this from me. And if they find my Jesus Save Me signs offensive, I'm so sorry. It's the only one I know to call on.
Now, another stipulation that you ought to realize that's in this particular law is that she has now had her property declared junk-free. So if there is another complaint filed in the next 12 months against her alleging that she has junk on her property, all fines and fees are reinstated and she has to pay them. This will take her property from her. So she's not out from under the gun. She is under tremendous stress for the next 12 months. So, yeah, chip in, go ahead.
Sort of this. She ended up inheriting a piece of property on a main road in a valuable area. And somebody came in and built a $450,000 house next to her. And then they tried to sell the house and they couldn't sell it because, you know, houses just aren't selling that well now. Well, they decided it was because of her house and her junk, and so they filed a junk complaint against her. But this is her property was part of an estate. What's the name, the woman's name, Brewer, that's like the head of the Republican Party for North Alabama or something. Is it Jean Brewer or whatever her name is? It was their estate, and so they decided they wanted this woman off of this property, and they wanted to take it back. So they fined her $150 a day until it runs up to $5,000 plus administrative costs, just about doubles it. So she's looking at $10,000 fines, and she only makes $804 a month for her and her husband, who's a disabled veteran of the Korean War. So it's impossible for her to pay those kind of fines, and so her property will go up for sale to pay the fines. And we went out and fought for it and got her on television here in Huntsville and all this kind of stuff, and they suddenly found her in compliance. But she still has this hammer hanging over her head because anytime in the next 12 months, if anybody files another complaint, then all the fines will be reinstated at their maximum amount, and she can still lose the property.
Excuse me, you said file a complaint, whether or not the complaint has substance or has proven to be substance, if the complaint exists, period.
That's right. That's what the law says. If anyone files a complaint within the next 12 months.
So, attitudes, vindication, bad feelings, hurt feelings, or my monetary status are sufficient for me to be motivated to file it. I don't have to substantiate it.
Right.
Well, see, this is all up to the opinion of the county junk officer. If the county junk officer decides to say that this is junk, it's junk. And it's all relative.
There's no definition of junk.
Yeah, and I suppose that these people that have this $450,000 house now, suppose somebody gets her property, say, and they build $1 million house on that, and then they decide that $450,000 house is substandard, so it's junk. I mean, where does it end? You don't have any property rights. You've got some appointed official who has life or death say over what something is junk or what it's not.
Well, let me add to that this law, go ahead, you have it.
How does changing the people you elect to the county commission get rid of the junk officer and this ordinance or whatever you call it?
Because the county commission has the authority to rescind the junk ordinance.
Or to hire and fire.
Or to hire and fire, that's correct.
They hired him.
Then the 4 people in Elmore can outvote 1 and they can get rid of this garbage.
That's true.
Have they done so yet?
Well, in Marshall County, what happens is, in the 15 counties that we've had knowledge of, and that they have actually adopted this, the county commissioners will not put this back on the referendum. Every 4 years, the law stipulates that there can be a referendum on the issue of self-governance. It can be brought about by the county commission at their discretion, or by the people petitioning the government to have it put back on. And the county commissions across the board have refused to revisit this and place it back on a referendum for the people to vote on.
But the law states that you can't bring it back up for 4 years. However, they can vote not to enforce it until it goes back on the ballot or until it's rescinded.
And the other thing is that the county commissioner has the discretion of whether or not to enact an ordinance dealing with any one of these powers. So they could, in fact, say, well, we've made a mistake and we will no longer, you know, have you ever heard a politician say, I made a mistake? It's like hearing a preacher say he's made a mistake. But at any rate, they could do that if they so desired and had any backbone whatsoever. So, but the other thing that's interesting about this law is that it transfers all 3 branches of government into the county commissioner's hands. They hear the appeal and the complaint from the person that's been victimized. They have the legislative powers because they enact the ordinance, and there's no appeal to a judge at all. So they're the jury, they're the judge, they're the legislator, all in one body.
And they collect fines.
And they collect the fine, which goes in their coffers. Go to another subject. Remember, we talked a little bit about comprehensive planning, then we talked about limited self-governance, and now we're going to talk about the flood damage ordinance. And this has been adopted across the board. I haven't seen very few communities that have not adopted this. Most recent is Jackson County. And this deals, of course, with FEMA. And I want to make the point that FEMA's sustainability initiative formally began in November of 1998 when the Associate Director for Mitigation encouraged the regional directors of FEMA to set up a sustainable redevelopment program or function. So that kind of lays the groundwork. Now FEMA's going under this very same program, this umbrella, this essentially a religion, and implementing this. Now in the year 2000, there was a program description written by FEMA and put out freely available. It's about 32 pages long. And the reason I have this slide is because every elected official that I've heard talk about this flood damage ordinance has always said, well, this is absolutely mandatory. The federal government wrote it, they sent it to the state level, and now the state level has sent it on to us, so therefore we've adopted it. And the latest official that I heard say that was Chairman of County Commission in Jackson County, Tidmore, stood up in a crowd and said, well, we had to adopt it. So that's the reason this slide is here, and the very next quote. Because in this publication it says, in exchange for the availability of subsidized insurance, communities have to agree to protect new construction, substantially improve structures by adopting and enforcing very specific ordinances. So that's the reason that these organizations, local governments are adopting this insurance, is that there is availability of subsidized insurance. And further, it goes on and says that community participation in the National Flood Insurance Program is voluntary. And in the state ordinance that is being adopted across this state, it says that the state of Alabama authorized local governments to adopt regulations designed to promote the public health, safety, and general welfare of its citizens. It didn't say it mandated, it just authorized them to do this. So this is strictly a voluntary program, and once it is adopted, remember that federal government holding that big club, well, he's got land use planning in mind. This is federal zoning at the local level, and we'll kind of show that. Who designates an area a flood hazard? Well, the areas of special flood hazard are identified, of course, by FEMA, and in addition to that, the accompanying maps, the other supporting data, and any revision that is made thereto are adopted by reference and declared to be part and parcel of this regulation. So without ever thinking One idea about some bureaucrat sitting off somewhere in another part of the country writing regulation, once he writes it, it's automatically part and parcel of your local ordinance. The areas of special flood hazard may also include areas that have known to historically flood. That's a given. Next, any area that is defined through standard engineering practices. Now, it is accepted practice that computer modeling is a standard engineering practice. So some computer engineer sitting at a computer just feeds in the information and declares your area to be in a floodway, whether or not it's ever flooded. Next, by governmental agencies, of course, and that would mean any other governmental agency other than FEMA, or by private parties. Now, I haven't heard of a private party coming into public partnership with public-private partnership with government, but this says that a private party can have an area declared a floodway. Now, the Jackson County Emergency Management Agency Director is hereby appointed floodplain administrator, and he's charged with implementing this in Jackson County. Shelby County, it is the engineering department that takes care of this. It can be any bureaucrat that the county commission or the city government wants to name in charge of this program. So this is not hard and fast on emergency EMA director being in charge of it. Until I began to look at this, I never knew that there was an association of state floodplain managers. And I can imagine that it won't be long and we'll have a state association of floodplain managers, and we may even have regional associations of floodplain managers, and I'm sure they'll want to go to Fort Walton Beach for a conference, and then maybe every year or every other year go to Hawaii or some other exotic place, and I can see how much money that's going to cost us. But in this particular issue of their own publication, it says that all land area in the watershed drains toward the stream channel, and that construction in any part of the watershed can impact other properties. So we are not talking about a floodway. We are talking about every inch of the jurisdictional authority for the municipality or county government that has adopted this ordinance. Whoops, I went the wrong way. See if I can go back. Nope. Well, let me...
Are you straightening that out?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. In this country, we've always believed that you're innocent until you're proven guilty. What this floodplain ordinance does is it makes you guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. And to give an example about that, if you live on top of one of these mountains out here, you haven't got a drop of water within 20 miles of you. If you want to build any impervious surface, pour concrete, put a roof on a house, anything that has runoff, it now falls upon you to prove that the water that falls on your property will not at some point somewhere raise the flood level and cause the floodplain to change. That is impossible to prove. So if they really started strictly enforcing it, what it means is this county planner has life and death say over who can build what and where. And can you imagine the potential for graft and fraud and everything else in this? But basically you have to prove, which would take thousands and thousands of dollars for every case, that you're not going to damage somebody else at some point out in the future.
Next slide. Application for a development permit shall be made to the county engineer on forms furnished by the community prior to any development activities. I did not put prior in bold letters. That is how it is in the quote. So there is emphasis here that before you have any development whatsoever, you're going to go to the person, the bureaucrat that's in charge of this flood damage ordinance, and you're going to apply for any development on your property. Development means any man-made change to improved or unimproved real estate. So conceivably, if you're going to cut a limb off a tree, you're going to have to go to him to get a permit. Now that's just how bad this will eventually become. Vestavia has just hired their first tree arbor scientist, specialist, however you want to say it. And you can look for tree arbors to become part and parcel of this also. And by the way, that's because we have to balance nature and man, so we have to actually determine how much oxygen is put out by the vegetation within a given area to offset man's exhaling of his, you know, carbon dioxide. Thank you. The next is the duties of the county engineer shall include but shall not be limited to review of all development permits to ensure that the permit requirements of this ordinance have been satisfied. Essentially, he's saying that we're going to have to make sure that every permit is kept on hand to ensure that you're in compliance with every regulation that FEMA writes or any other department of the government, whether it's state or local, is in compliance. And he's got to keep all records on hand at all times. Next, no structure or land shall hereafter be located, extended, converted, or altered without full compliance with the terms of this ordinance and other applicable regulations. And I hope that, I've said that many times and I've never had anybody that had any question on that. You're just not going to do anything until you're in compliance with everything. Next, all subdivision proposals shall have public utilities and facilities such as sewer, gas, electrical, water systems, located and constructed to minimize flood damage. Now, this, in essence, produces an urban growth boundaries or utility service area. Utilities, and let me go back. Urban growth boundary is merely a line around your community and says that we're not going to have any development whatsoever on the outside of that line, and all growth is going to be within the urban growth boundary. Now, the Shelby County Comprehensive Plan, which is the model comprehensive plan for the state of Alabama, does not use UGB. That term is kind of antiquated. They use the term utility service area. So we're going to provide within a specific area utilities for your convenience. Outside of that line, we're not going to allow water, gas, any other modern convenience go beyond that line. So automatically, we have destroyed your property value. We've destroyed anybody that wants to buy your property because you can't get any of the modern conveniences that we consider necessity. Inside the utility service area, the property value goes through the roof because there is a shortage of usable land by governmental dictates. So this, in essence, is implementing this utility service area without saying so.
Well,
go ahead.
Reinforce that too. I mean, you understand what this says. You can't build anything until you have all these things in place. And if you're outside the city public service area, you cannot get these things. So any land that lays outside this imaginary line that they drew, or this arbitrary line that they drew, now becomes absolutely useless for development. You just lost the value of your property. You can't do anything with it. You draw a line, the property on one side of the line because it's inside the UGB is worth a tremendous amount of money because that's the only property that can be developed and it's in shortage. If you're outside that line, your land has no value except maybe as agricultural land.
Yeah, and consider this, that you have certain influence over your elected official, your local elected official. This takes that away from your influence. It places it at the federal level. So you can go to your city hall or your county commission and say, look, I'm going to vote you out of office. You can say it all you want to. You can vote him out of office all you want to. The power now resides in a bureaucrat that now has to listen to the federal government about these permits. So this in effect stiffens the ability of government to strangle our private property rights. In the interpretation and application of this ordinance, all provisions shall be considered a minimum requirement, liberally construed in favor of the governing body. Tie does not go to the runner, it goes to the government, or the umpire calling the shots. Next, this ordinance shall not create liability on the part of Jackson County or any other municipality that has adopted it in Alabama or by any officer or employee thereof for any flood damages that result from reliance on this ordinance or any administrative decision lawfully made thereunder. So if you follow every dictate they say to the best of your ability and you are flooded out, you can't do anything about it. There is no liability from following anything that the government says. Any person who violates this ordinance or fails to comply with any part of it shall, upon conviction, be fined not more than $500 or imprisoned for not more than 30 days, or both. And in addition, shall pay all costs and expenses involved in this, and each day, of course, is a new violation. Now, remember, this thing is being sold as an insurance program for the private property owners in your jurisdictional area. So now here are the actual written objectives contained within the law. And they are to protect human health and life, to minimize damage to public facilities such as water and electric gas mains, to minimize or to help maintain a stable tax base. Now this is a tax base under sustainable development principles. And I urge anyone that wants to look at this, you can go look at GASB-34, which is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, and they have a whole new set of parameters that are being placed against and being adopted by local, by the way, it's voluntary, by the way, by local governments and state governments. And this is all part of a shift from our economic system as it exists into a green economy, where we will account for the limb that you cut off. Next, to minimize expenditures of public money on costly flood projects, to minimize the need to rescue anybody that is in danger of a flood, to minimize prolonged business interruptions, to ensure that potential home buyers are notified that their property may be in a floodway or is in a floodway. And then the final one, which actually is part of the model ordinance itself. This has not been adopted by any Alabama community or municipality that I could find, but it is in the federal model ordinance, and it says that to ensure that those who occupy the areas of special flood hazard assume the responsibilities for their action. Now, I don't know what kind of tax or mitigation fee you may have to pay for residing in a declared floodway, but and I have not seen this applied anywhere. So that, certainly they could come along and add this stipulation and then come after you because you are residing in a floodway at some point later on. But I want to make sure that you don't miss the point, because flood insurance was not listed as one of the objectives. The very fact that they're selling this as a flood insurance program is denied, and I want to reinforce that, because in section 1316 it says that no flood insurance shall be provided which the administrator, remember that's a bureaucrat now, finds has been declared by a duly constituted state, local zoning authority, or other authorized public body to be in violation of the state or local laws, regulations, or ordinances which are intended to discourage or otherwise restrict land development or occupancy in a flood-prone area. So that pretty much says that if they don't want to give you insurance because you're in an area where they don't want you, you're not going to get flood insurance.
So if you're in a flood-prone area, you can't get flood insurance, is what that said.
So now, remember, we've talked about freedom of choice, we've talked about governance, and now let me talk about new construction. Because if I say new construction to you, I'm sure one engineer in the crowd would say, well, it's new construction, I'm going to go out and start on the foundation today, and 6 months later I'm going to have a building. That's new construction. Not so. New construction means any structure for which the start of construction commenced April the 24th after April the 24th, 1990, and any subsequent improvements to that property. Now, in Shelby County, they've gone back to 1987, 88. I can't remember the exact date. So it's not a fixed and concrete date. The municipality or county government can pick any date they want to. And naturally, you would be in non-compliance because you're considered new construction. Now, encroachments of a floodway are prohibited. What are those encroachments? Infilling, new construction, substantial improvements, or other development within the adopted regulatory floodway. So automatically, you can see how if you were in the real estate business and you knew the person that was in charge of this program, graft, because he would know where the designation was going to be, and whose property was going to be worthless and whose property was going to be very valuable. Just from this knowledge. This whole thing is set up for graft and corruption from the get-go. In Houston, where this has already occurred, there are 5 lawsuits. This is a big deal in Houston, Texas. We are eventually going to wind up with lawsuits, I'm sure, because somebody's going to take these people to court. And now I'm going to show you a clip, video clip that was actually aired on the Houston television station that talks about what is going on with this in Houston, and it kind of, I hope, brings it home. So here we go.
Property is worth a lot, not just to you, but to the city that collects taxes on its value.
And now the group fighting Houston's floodway ordinance says the city's own law is costing it billions, and all that money going down the drain could mean you lose services. 11 News reporter Jeremy Diesel has been following this fight for months and joins us now with the very latest. Jeremy?
Well, the city says it's needed to limit the damage from flooding in our frequently waterlogged city. So the ordinance says if your property is in a floodway like this one, no building on it. But property owners feeling the impact of Houston's floodway ordinance say the biggest flood is of money out of their bank accounts, and now they think they've proved it. Seems like a steal. House after house, then a lot ready for a home.
It's a beautiful piece of land.
That's just what Realtor Marissa Talty's client thought. $20,000 later, he had his lot, but now that steal feels more like a robbery.
This piece of land that he's bought with his life savings, it's worthless.
He's not alone. The Floodway Coalition of Houston didn't even exist before October of 2006, but they've been busy since the city of Houston passed Ordinance Chapter 19. Its no-build provision for structures in a floodway has overnight made thousands of properties like this virtually worthless.
There's nobody can buy it. That's the bottom line.
The Floodway Coalition commissioned a study by an appraisal company to try to put a number on the loss of value to both property owners and the city through taxable value. What did it find? $1.9 to $3.5 billion. On the low end, that would be like totally removing the city of LaPorte from the tax rolls, or the city of Bel Air's $2.5 billion tax base. In fact, the loss to Houston could be bigger than the entire tax base of any city in Harris County except Pasadena. And it's an impact that keeps on giving. $38 to $70 million a year in lost taxes every year. What's that mean? Or what would you have to cut to make up that kind of loss? $33 million is the entire library budget for Houston. $60 million? Parks. $72 million? Solid waste. The city isn't the only one losing money. So is the owner of this lot. All his money.
Pablo works 10 hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week. And this is just wrong. I mean, it is really wrong.
His American dream isn't dead, just starting over. And that's a nightmare. Now, a number of property owners are suing the city over the ordinance. There was no comment from the mayor's office tonight, but in the past, Mayor White has said the ordinance overall is a net benefit to the city. For now, we're live downtown. I'm Jeremy Diesel, 11 News.
So that's going to kind of conclude everything. And I just want to end with this one quote from the Alabama 1901 Constitution, which if we lose, we will lose it all, in my opinion, and we won't have a leg to stand on. And it says that the sole object and only legitimate end of government is to protect the citizen in the enjoyment of life, liberty, and property. And when government assumes other functions, it is usurpation and oppression. And I submit to you, we're there. And if we don't stand up and do something, it will only get worse. I hope you have questions.
Well, let me kick in one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before we give an example, is one individual down in Houston, his house appraised, I think, for like $115,000 the day before they passed this floodplain ordinance. The day after they passed it, his new appraisal was $8,000. Okay, so he went from $115,000 to $8,000 if he could find a buyer, which nobody could use it. Also remember that what they call new construction, you know, if you have made any improvements on that property that exceeds 50%, then they can come in and take it as new construction. Well, now the new value is $8,000, so if the man had put a new roof on his house that cost over $4,000, the city could come take that house and bulldoze it to the ground, and the owner would get $4,000 for a $115,000 house. So that's how they got 10,000 houses in Houston that have fallen under this floodplain ordinance. 10,000 people whose property values went from up here to next to nothing. So this is exceedingly damaging. And all this stuff that FEMA does when Katrina came through, all these government loans these people got, they don't realize it, but in the small print, it says, if you take this government loan, you will comply with all these sustainability regulations. And at some point in the future, when these people decide they want to expand their house or they want to add a carport or something, they're going to find out they're forbidden to do it, because you can't change the footprint on your property if you took that loan. FEMA sees every disaster now as an opportunity to take land and give it back to the government. That's what they're doing.
Question? Yeah. Sir.
In 1990, a guy here, a libertarian named Mike Siebert, was running for Bud Kramer's, what was he, 92 maybe? 92, I think. And I have a house in Madison, and I put a Mike Siebert for Congress sign in the front. We got a call from the code enforcement officer of Madison saying Mike Siebert hadn't paid his, I don't know, $100 registration fee with the city of Madison, and I, as a homeowner, was in violation because I had posted his political sign in my front yard on my private property, not up by a road somewhere, in my front yard. And they have a law that says if you're a candidate, you have to, just pay this fee so private citizens can post your signs in their yard. Otherwise, the owner of the property has to pay a $50 fine per day. And we took him to court in Birmingham federal court, and the guy dismissed it without prejudice, unfortunately, because Madison didn't actually try to collect their fee. But it was a big trial and everything. But they did that in 1992 without any of this stuff. So you give them...
Well, actually, 1992 is when Bush went to Rio and signed Agenda 21, which is the Bible for sustainable development. And this goes back a long time, actually, before that, because the Brookland, Harlem Brookland, in our global neighborhood is credited with the actual definition for sustainable development, and that was written in the 1980s. So this concept goes back a long way.
The other one that we defeated 4 years in a row was they wanted to take all of the state and county boundaries out of the Constitution and put them on, just under a code, which means that the Alabama legislature could any day vote to eliminate them and the people wouldn't have a say on it. As long as they're in the Constitution, you had a chance to vote on it. Because what they're going, these people are looking 25, 30, 50 years down the road. Eventually, we're not going to have boundaries based on state and county lines. We're going to have boundaries based on watershed and green areas, and the value of your property is actually going to be determined partially based on how green you are, how in compliance you are with the United Nations sustainability regulations. And so that's what they're moving toward. What was it? There were 13 or something like that areas nationwide, and I think 7 for the state of Alabama.
It's called ecosystem management, and you can actually type in ecosystem management and sustainable development, and you'll get all kind of hits dealing with this issue, and even down to currency issue on ecosystem management basis, so that your currency and what value that currency is in relationship to how you live within your ecosystem. You travel further away from your home base, you have a depreciation of your ecosystem credits, your money, if you will. So that's essentially how we're working into this new tax base that this ordinance was talking about.
See, we're moving towards a cashless society where everything's just going to be computer credits. And you think about it, if you're not green enough for them, or if you do something that they don't like, they can just a few keystrokes, your money is worth less, your property is worth less, you can be either penalized or rewarded depending on how in compliance you are with their religion.